Hi, it's Shalini again, and in this episode, I was going to share the continuation of the journey, and this time it was so just to refresh your memory in case you didn't see the last one. I went to two back-to-back ayahuasca retreats where I met my higher self, and the big thing that I came away with was I could viscerally feel the love that we're immersed in and surrounded by, and I could also feel the pain and suffering that each individual, myself, and humanity faces. So I was holding space for both of those situations, both of those dynamics in the same breath, and it was killing me because I could feel the pain and I could feel the love, and it was the irony and the beauty and the sadness of being able to feel both of those so viscerally. So that's what I came away with, and then um, I went to a 10-day silent retreat about 2 weeks after the last ayahuasca journey. And what happened there was pretty remarkable. So I've been to, it was vipassana, it's a 10-day silent retreat, and it's based on Buddhist principles. It's not religious at all. I mean, Buddhism isn't so religious as it is spiritual. But uh, I had a pretty incredible experience. So I'm going to just summarize what I experienced there. And essentially, so just to kind of give you the gist of it, of the philosophy. So Buddha was alive 2,500 years ago, and he was a prince that had, um, everything, and he renounced all of it. He went, into the forest, and he started experimenting with all these different techniques to try to, find peace and enlightenment and so on. And he ended up discovering this technique and so he achieved enlightenment at the age of 35, and he taught the technique for 45 years until his death at 80, and he just gave it away freely, wanting to help other people. And so the basic philosophy that he discovered was he there are four parts of the mind. So in that time that he described it, and I'll translate it where I do know it related to current modern psychology. So the first part of the mind are the senses, and so you pick up signals through the senses. Second part of the mind is uh, perception, where you tap into your memory to recognize a signal. Is it a dog? Is it a piece of candy? Or what is it? The third part of the mind is and then the second part of the mind will also evaluate it. So is it pleasant or unpleasant? And then the third part of the mind is a sensation. So every signal that comes in has a sensation somewhere on the body. You may or may not feel it based on how sharp your mind is. There'll be a sensation somewhere on the body. And then you'll have an emotional response to that sensation, that pleasant or unpleasant sensation. And if you have an extreme response, like aversion or craving, I either hate it or I love it, this sensation, then you'll either you'll either pull up and reinforce an existing, what he called a sankhara, which is a habit pattern, kind of like trauma. You bring up the old habit pattern and you reinforce it. Now you generate more sankharas, or more, it kind of multiplies, it grows, the trauma deepens in the system, the habit pattern deepens in the system. And if whether you love it or you hate it, and the way to think of it in modern psychology is a little bit like going into fight or flight. You go into fight or flight, you have a strong emotional reaction. You go into fight or flight, you lose the conscious mind. Your conscious mind kind of shuts down a little bit. In Buddhism, they call it, you lose the balance of the conscious mind. And then, you're basically, your subconscious kind of running the show. And Buddha would describe them as these sleeping volcanoes that would emerge, and then it overwhelms you. So just exactly like fight or flight, it overwhelms you, and you can't control it. And then you have these reactions. And the sankhara would come with a mental action, a vocal action, and possibly a physical action. So depending on how deeply ingrained it was in the system would determine what you did. And it wouldn't necessarily be something you can control. Maybe you just have a thought, but you might also have you say something, you yell at someone, or you burn a bridge or whatever. And then if it's even more ingrained, maybe you'll do something. You'll go take an action, call someone, or go and hurt someone, or take something, or do something, to take an action. So depending on how ingrained it is, and then that further reinforces the habit pattern, so that it becomes more ingrained in the system. And so it deepens the sankhara. It becomes, instead of being ingrained in what he described as water, then sand, then stone. And so essentially, and if you don't have a sankhara and you have a strong reaction of aversion or craving, then it would create a sankhara in the system. And the way that the sankharas manifest in the system, besides creating these actions, the way it would manifest would be in the mental physical structure, there would be rigidity. So, this could be in the personality, where you have rigid patterns of behavior, emotional behavioral patterns, or it would be in your physical body as knots. And so this eventually will turn into injury, illness, and disease. And so, you what starts happening is and this is happening subconsciously. So you may not even realize that there's a signal that you picked up, that there's a sensation developed, that you have an emotional reaction to it, that could be aversion or craving based on your old habit patterns or the way you're wired. You generate these sankharas to become more rigid in the physical and the mental structure. And this is what leads to your misery, because every sensation only lasts for a short period of time. They're impermanent, law of impermanence. And so when it disappears, you're then craving subconsciously. Again, you're maybe craving or not wanting. And the whole point is, I'm not comfortable with the present. I'm not able to accept the present as it is. So I'm either hate it, I want it to go away, or I love it and I want more of it. And this is what he described as addiction, is like when the sensation wears off, that's when you're craving that sensation again. Not so much the alcohol or the new car or the new job or the new title, but it's that sensation that we crave, and then we're chasing it. So we're continuing. So he was describing addiction in this way. And so trauma is one piece, and then craving is the other. Aversion and craving are both habit patterns that form in the system. So the technique he discovered was that if he could sharpen his mind enough to pick up the sensations and then not observe or react to it, then he would basically, he wouldn't create the sankharas. He wouldn't reinforce the existing sankharas. And then he would be able to, start releasing the old sankharas, the old stock in the system. And when he removed all of them, that's when we removed all the habit patterns and all of the sankharas, and he became liberated. And that was enlightenment. And so, and what he discovered was that at the end of the life, the deepest, most ingrained sankhara was the one that would become the mind of the next life. So, reincarnation, the cycle of birth and death, and the attachment to these sensations. Either I don't want something and I want to go away, or I want something and I, more of it. Either way, it would lead to this misery, this attachment to these sensations. And what he discovered was that by breaking this cycle, so by removing these sankharas and no longer creating new sankharas, he would be able to get out of this cycle of birth and death. And so the technique that they taught was essentially, they had us first on the first day sharpening the mind. So they had us focus on the nose and the area right above the upper lip, small area, so you can start to sharpen the mind. And then he basically spent like 10 hours, the first full day he spent focusing. And the whole point was to feel the respiration, the breathing. In the beginning, I couldn't even feel my nose, much less the sensation of the respiration. But as your mind gets sharper over time, and your mind will wander. Now, think about what happens when you wander. When it goes to the past, it's either going to things I'm nostalgic about, so craving, or things that people did to me, rejected me, humiliated, upset me, aversion. Or it wanders to the future. Things I'm looking forward to, craving, or things that I'm dreading, aversion. So as long as your mind is wandering, subconsciously you're generating these sankharas, you're becoming a bundle of knots and a factory of misery. And so by focusing the mind on these meditations, you're basically turning the faucet off. And they have us in noble silence. There's no reading, no writing, no talking, no eye contact, 10 hours a day of meditation. So because of that, there are much fewer signals that are coming in through your five senses. And so you're not generating as many signals, and of course, less opportunity to generate more sankharas. And then by meditating, you're now also not, wandering to the, and it takes practice, but you're slowly reducing the amount of time you're spent wandering. So you're not generating as many sankharas. And then what they did on day 2 was they had us now pick a spot where you can feel the breathing touch the face. So it could be inside of the nostril or under the nose or whatever, and just focus on that one spot. And you're narrowing your mind even further so that you could, start to sharpen the mind. And then on day 3, what they did was they had us focus on the upper lip. And now take that sharpened mind and start to feel for sensations in this area. And it could be anything. It could be heat, cold, pressure, pulsing, tension, pain, whatever. And the whole point is, don't react to it. And the reason for that is that every sensation is impermanent. So even they said if it's itchy, don't itch it. And initially I thought, that's going to drive me nuts. But then I realized, after a while, it actually does go away. And by doing that, by being equanimous, not reacting, staying calm, and just observing it, you're basically practicing 2 things. One is how to no longer react to these sankharas so that you can release them from the system, these habit patterns, these traumas from the system. And what starts happening is, because there are biochemical reactions happening all over the body, you will start feeling these sensations on every part of the body. And it'll be the subtle, atomic reaction or the biochemical reactions happening on the surface of your skin. It'll start to feel like a subtle vibration. But then what'll start happening is, assuming you have no aversion or craving, so you don't start craving like, I wish I had a sensation, or I wish I didn't have this sensation, this type of sensation. As long as you're not generating any aversion or craving to the sensation, you're just observing and releasing. The old stock will start coming to the surface of the skin. And as long as you don't react to those and release them, you'll start releasing these sankharas, lightening them in your system, removing them from your system. And what they said is that you shouldn't experience this in your next life. This should be something that you experience right after the course. If not, then you're doing something wrong and you need to talk to the teachers. So essentially, this was the technique. And the fourth day then, we took what they said, you sharpen the knife, your mind, and now the fourth day you're going to start the operation over the whole body. So what they had us do was start at the top of the head and take 2-inch pieces, 2 or 3 inch pieces, and scan the entire body from head to toe, toe to head to toe, toe to head. And essentially every piece, you're looking for sensations. No aversion, no craving, just observing. And as soon as you feel anything, you go to the next spot. Feel something, go to the next spot. I feel an itch, I feel a pulse, I feel pressure, I feel pain, heat, cold, whatever. If there may be some areas you feel no sensation, and those are blind or numb spots, and those too, again, no aversion or craving. You stay there for a minute, feel nothing, you keep scanning. So essentially you keep doing this. Now, what I ended up doing was, I took my yoga balls with me, and because I have really low back and neck pain, and if sitting for that many hours causes a lot of pain, so I realized from the last time I went, they were really helpful in removing the pain. And even more than that, when I started sharpening the mind last time, I started, like, what would normally take me a couple days to melt knots in my, somewhere in my body, and I started scanning my full body after I did the areas that were the most painful. And what I started noticing was that as my mind sharpened through the course, through the 10 days of the course, I would be able to go deeper and more rapidly dissolve these knots. And to the point where when I bent over to like touch my toes, for example, like in a yoga pose or something, which I don't do much yoga, but if I bent over, because I had so many stiff muscles and, broken or injured so many joints, I was pretty stiff, like they would only reach to my shins. And in 10 breaths, my elbows were practically on the ground. So that's how much I was able to melt these knots with just my awareness or my breathing. If I breathed, it would go even more rapidly. So that was something, so I brought these yoga balls back. And what ended up happening was, I won't go through all the details, but I'll give you kind of the gist of it. So I was going through these roller coasters, and I knew from the ayahuasca journey that I'd been to and my own experiences in over the last couple of years is that, I might perceive it as a negative, like a trauma or something bad triggering that's happening to me. But if I just honor it and allow it to move through me and honor whatever emotions are arising, I then discover it opens the way or clears the way for me to have, what I would call kind of an upper world day, where I start to experience like the gifts of that, like what it's bringing me to, what it's opening up. And so I was kind of experiencing those things. And like initially, like one of the things they said is that, for old students, on the third day, instead of focusing above the upper lip, just continue focusing on the breathing, the respiration. And on the fourth day, you start the body scan because you've already been, and in reality, I hadn't practiced a whole lot since my last round, which was 4 years ago. And so I should have really done it like a new student. But for whatever reason, I know now, but I duplicated, I followed the path of an old student. So I thought, now, one thing that was interesting was after I got back from the second round, and I'd get up, sometimes I'd get up in the mornings, like 4:30 or 5 in the morning, I'd automatically wake up. And I would have that same sharpness of mind where I'd be able to like resolve any tension in my body by just breathing into it. So my low back or my neck or whatever, I was able to like, and so, that would happen every so often. I'd be able to melt, or remove these knots and remove any pain. And because it's in noble silence and it's silent all of the time, it was almost like being 4:30 in the morning all the time, all day, because I didn't make that connection initially. So the next morning, I suddenly started getting all of these sharp, the sharp mind and ability to melt these knots. And I thought it was the technique. I thought because, I'm already an old student, I'm able to do this more rapidly. So I started melting knots in my body. And I was melting lots of them. My mind felt pretty sharp. But then it kind of wore off. Like a few days later, it started to wear off. And I was thinking like, well, that's weird. And what I realized was I hadn't actually sharpened my mind enough. So when I did the body scan, I wasn't able to feel sensations over all parts of the body. But then I started doing this general sweep. And it was kind of like, because there was momentum, I was kind of like tricked myself into thinking I had, you know, the technique down, and it was a really sharp mind. And what ended up happening is on day 6, when they did a check-in with us, they checked, like, are you doing sweeps or part by part? And I said, oh, I'm doing mostly sweeps and then occasionally a part by part. And they said, you should be alternating. And as soon as I started doing that, I realized my mind wasn't sharp enough to pick up the sensations when I did the part by part. And I panicked. I freaked out. I realized almost more than half the course was over. And I was going to have to start over from scratch, possibly. So I like totally broke down. I was in my room in tears and, you know, sobbing. And I couldn't, my mind became more agitated. When your mind becomes agitated, it's like going to sympathetic tone or fight or flight. You lose the sharpness of the mind. You can't pick up any sensations. And of course, everything comes to a grinding halt, basically. And so, you know, I was in my room and I was crying and I was lying on my bed and my ear was to the bed. And then all of a sudden I could hear my heart beating. And I remember this research that I mentioned in the first video, why I left Google. This research from Sarah Garfinkel that showed that by tuning into your heartbeat, you could reduce anxiety. And I thought, hey, for me to become equanimous, you know, calm mind, equanimity is necessary for me to increase my awareness, my sharpness of my mind. So I thought, hey, maybe if I tune into my heartbeat, maybe I can, you know, calm. And they don't really want you doing any of this stuff. Like, they don't want you doing yoga. They don't want you doing yoga balls. They don't want you doing any of this new techniques of like regulated breathing or anything. But I was pretty desperate at that point, and so I really wanted to try it. So I basically ended up putting, focusing on my heart rate, and I was able to like dramatically reduce my stress levels. And then I was able to suddenly feel the sensations. And so I sat up and I was able to, hold on a second.